So this past week I've been thinking pretty heavily on the Switch 2 and whether or not I'm going to end up buying it. And I'm a pretty huge Zelda fan, and obviously Pokemon is my bread and butter, so I'm probably gonna fold, unfortunately, but I'm not happy about it. Especially with what's been shown to us in the Legend Z8 commercial and the most recent Nintendo Directs, it's gonna cost me a pretty penny just to play this one game if Pokemon Legend Z8 was all I was going to play. With the game itself costing $80 and the system costing $450, after taxes, I'm paying around $600 just to play a single game. But all of this has made me stop and think, what would it cost someone who has never played Pokemon to play through the entire franchise? And to be clear, I'm obviously excluding emulators because that ruins the point of the video. What I'm more interested in is how much it would roughly cost for someone to own the most optimal game from every generation with a console that could play it. So let's take a look at all of the main series Pokemon games, which one most optimally tells their story of that generation in my opinion, and what consoles needed to play it. And then at the end, let's play a fun little game where we add everything up from generations 1 through 9 and see how much it costs in comparison to the Switch 2 and the new Pokemon game. And if you like content like this and you want to see more, don't forget to hit the like button down below for me. Make sure you're subscribed and you tell me down in the comment section below. I'm pretty sure my channel's dead, and I'm pretty sure this is all to no avail. So I may only be putting out videos for a bit longer unless, I see some subscribes, because unfortunately I think that this channel's dead. So, subscribe. Starting off with Generation 1, we actually have quite a few different options from all the original games, the Generation 3 remakes for the GBA, and the Switch predecessors. Now, while I personally do have a ton of nostalgia for these games, especially games like Pokemon Blue and Yellow, as they were my first, I do recognize that these games are just way too archaic for new players to be able to jump into from the start. The mechanics were outdated and hardly looked like modern Pokemon. Moves were limited, type advantages didn't always work correctly, and ultimately, the game is just slow. Instead, I think a better look should be had at either Leaf Green and Fire Red, or Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. Now, starting with the latter, these games have a ton of advantages that obviously the Gen 3 remakes aren't going to be able to take advantage of. The games look and play smoother, the graphics are amazing, and your Pokemon in these games feel more in kin with something like Nintendogs, so it feels much more rewarding to get attached to them. But, ultimately there is one fatal issue with these games that prevent me from wanting to make it the representative for Gen 1, and that's obviously the catching method. Now, that's not saying that anything's wrong with this catching method, it's so drastically different from the rest of the Pokemon games in the main series that I wouldn't want players starting with this game to get the wrong mindset of what the franchise looks like moving forward. If we remember the good old days pre-COVID, Pokemon Let's Go was essentially a main series game meant to tie into the once popular Pokemon Go for the mobile devices. And as such, the game has many options and features that a main series game wouldn't, like the ability to transfer Pokemon en masse at any time. As such, I think Fire Red and Leaf Green would be the best representatives for Generation 1. They move and feel good, don't depart too far from the original game, but still update and add enough to make the game have its own identity. And what I love about these games, aside from the personal nostalgia, is that they were introduced at a time where Pokemon was evolving quite a bit. Things like a physical special split and reusable TMs would come to the generation soon after this, so it feels somewhat fitting to have this generation be the first in a new player's repertoire. With all that being said though, what does the price look like? Well, it should be of no surprise, but now that these games are starting to age and collectors are starting to see the value of a franchise like Pokemon, getting your hands on these older games for a reasonable price is extremely hard. So the prices that I list here will be on average of what I found in my area, but you may be able to find something cheaper or it might be more expensive depending on where you are. For Leaf Green, the lowest average I found was around $70, and thankfully we don't need a Game Boy Advance to play these games. We can actually save a little money and buy a Nintendo DS, which has the capability to play both Game Boy Advance and DS games, and you can easily find a DS Lite online for $60. And as a way to keep the pace of this video going, what we're going to be doing is talking about all of the games in order from this point forward, their prices, and then we'll be talking about the consoles afterwards and add it all up. I want to keep the pace going a la Smith Plays Pokemon. Jumping into Generation 2, we're left with only two options, which is fitting, I suppose. Gold, Silver, and Crystal are the original games made for the Game Boy Color, and while they do have a big improvement in many ways from the original games, there is still a lot to be desired in the form of modern mechanics, and honestly amongst fans, the Generation 2 games are seen as some of the worst, so it only makes sense to have a more modernized version of the games that at least play smoother and look better. Heart Gold and Soul Silver are games that came out for the DS and offer everything that the originals have and much more. In fact, it's kind of crazy to me how big of a jump there is from Gold, Silver, and Crystal to Heart Gold and Soul Silver, mechanic-wise and just thought process-wise, because this is only 2 generations in console. Granted, it's quite a bit of time, but Heart Gold and Soul Silver is touted by many veteran players as like the pinnacle of Pokemon. So it's crazy to me to see how backwards they started going after this. These games offered updated mechanics, special events if you had specific legendary Pokemon, and most importantly, the ability for Pokemon to follow behind you. This one mechanic was so prevalent and loved amongst fans that it has been a talking point for every subsequent game afterwards, and it was actually one of the most beloved parts of Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. Overall, it makes way too much sense not to have Heart Gold and Soul Silver as the representative for Generation 2. Generation 3 is in a pretty similar boat, although not as bad as the original games. Sapphire, Ruby, and Emerald are all great in their own right, but just like many of the early Pokemon games have a decent amount of issues and limitations. And while I do think that it's worth playing these games just to see the start of the series for a lot of fans, it is worth mentioning that ORAS is just better in nearly every single way. Better battle mechanics, more Pokemon available, better storylines, and the introduction of Mega Pokemon just elevate the remakes to a level that the originals can't really seem to achieve. Not to mention the post-story. I remember being absolutely blown away whenever I was able to finally fight Deoxys in-game after hearing all of the myths and the legends of things like Birth Island, for example. 3DS variants run better, are more interactive, and just have way more to offer while building on top of what the originals left behind. So, there's no reason to choose the originals in my opinion. Generation 4 is where we take a step back, as we see the most recent remakes for these games actually did worse than their predecessors. Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl were games that fans had been clamoring about for years, myself included. We had been asking for a Generation 4 remake just because of how special that game is to a lot of fans. And while we got it, we didn't get what we expected. See, these games are more of a polished version of Diamond and Pearl with a few extra bells and whistles. And you may be asking yourself, well, what's the issue with that? The main issue, dear viewer, is that Diamond and Pearl already had a successor, and it came just a year later in Pokemon Platinum. The main difference between the base games and Platinum is that Platinum had a better storyline, Pokedex and wild Pokemon, and boss battles. Like, if we take a look at Diamond and Pearl, there are only 2 Fire-type families in this generation, one of which being your starter. And yet, there is a Fire-type Elite Four member who, again, only uses the 2 Fire types. He has a team of 5, with 2 of them being Fire. Platinum fixed this issue by actually making the available Pokemon much larger in variety, and as such, many boss battles were updated to feel more genuine and challenging. What did BDSP do? Copy Diamond and Pearl almost down to the T, including but not limited to the crappy Pokedex and the awful boss battles. Now, I will make note that the battles in this game are technically harder, as trainers' Pokemon actually have items and good natures, but that doesn't fix the issue that this game has. Nintendo had a chance to knock this game out of the ballpark by just copying Platinum instead of Diamond and Pearl, and I genuinely can't think of a reason as to why they didn't. But for the purpose of our video, we're going to be choosing Platinum as our Generation 4 representative. Generation 5 is interesting because I actually think that both Black and White and Black and White 2 stand on their own very well. The stories are connected, but not so much that you have to play both generations. Both games come from the same era and as such play almost exactly the same. And both games offer their own charm, with the original Black and White acting as a soft reboot to the series and only having original Pokémon in it, while Black and White 2 acted as the sequel we all expected, which blended both Pokémon new and old. Honestly, I really have no say on which one of these that you should get. Both series are extremely enjoyable, and when it comes down to it, the only difference that I see, aside from the Pokédex, is the price point. Black and White 2 being a little bit cheaper than Black and White, seeing as Black and White was the original. Generation 6 has no deliberation. The only true Generation 6 games to be released to this point are X and Y, so just pick from whichever of those you like. Pretty soon we'll have Legends Z8 to deliberate about, and my theory is that it'll make more than X and Y, as I see those games as the worst in the series, but I'm still not happy with what's been shown of ZA. Generation 7 is extremely similar to Generation 5, as the games between Sun and Moon and Ultra Sun and Moon are pretty similar gameplay-wise. The stories are different enough to give each their own personality, but with the addition of extra content and an expanded Pokédex, I think Ultra Sun and Moon are definitely the better representatives for Generation 7. Plus, like before, for some reason the sequels of these games are less expensive than the originals. Once again, with Generation 8, we really have no deliberation. Sword and Shield are the only two games that have been released for this generation, so it's really up to you what you'd like, though I will say that while Sword has the better legendary, I think Shield has the better exclusives. And now we're here with Generation 9. This is actually a weird situation where I think buying two different games is necessary for the experience of Pokemon. Obviously there's going to be the main series games, which are Scarlet and Violet, and just like previously discussed with Sword and Shield, the only difference between these games are going to be the legendary that you get and the version exclusive Pokemon that are available. While these games are necessary, I do think it's important for players to also play Legends Arceus. Now, I mentioned earlier that the Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee games wouldn't be a great idea for players to start out with because it would divulge too far from the path of what Pokemon is known for, and in the same breath you could say the same thing about Legends Arceus, but only if it was the introduction to the series. Legends Arceus was seen as a breath of fresh air because the Pokemon formula had been stale for so long, and this allowed us to experience the world of Pokemon in a whole new way. Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee did something similar, but we already had a feel of what those games would play like thanks to Pokemon Go. Legends Arceus was something completely new and innovative to the world of Pokemon, and with the introductions of Legends ZA, I think it would be crucial for players to play this game before Legends ZA releases. So, with all that being said, what are our final totals? Well, adding up the games and assuming that we go with the lower average totals, our totals are going to look like this. Now, granted, these are just the games that we still need to grab the consoles, but if you notice, dear viewers, we actually managed to keep the consoles needed for these games down to a minimum of 3. A DS, a 3DS, and a Nintendo Switch. Now, as I mentioned before, a DS Lite is pretty cheap at around just $60, and you can easily find a good condition 3DS for around $150, while the Switch on average is still going to run you around $269 for a regular and $400 for an OLED, which is what I have. All in all, you're looking at a console total of around $479 to $610, and a grand total of everything discussed today would run you roughly $1,063.95 or $1,264.95. So now that we're here, you may be saying to yourself, "Whoa, Ronan, that's a lot of money." And to that I'd be saying, you're correct, that is a lot of money. But if we compare that to what's coming out now, which is a slightly better Nintendo Switch that is running with PS4 graphics and mechanics, and a single Pokemon game that looks solely disappointing for a sum total of $540 before tax, the price doesn't seem too crazy. After all, you could pay for an entire franchise of games compared to just one console and one game. All in all, this is one expensive franchise that only seems to be getting more expensive as the years go on, and while I would be okay with paying a little bit extra just to see the franchise I love do better as time goes on, That's ultimately not what we're getting. Instead, Nintendo is locking in on trends of what does and doesn't work to make them money, and are throwing fans' thoughts and concerns to the wayside. And let me just end with this, dear viewers. If you think they're bringing back Mega Pokemon because they care about you, think back to previous generations. Think back to Dynamax, to Terastallization, which we have now, to Z Crystals. Never once did they talk about bringing these things back. Now granted, fans never clamored for them as much as Mega Evolution. But what do you think is going to make them more money? Mega Evolution or Dynamax? Mega Evolution or Z Crystals? At the end of the day, this is about them, not about you. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to hit the like button down below for me. Like I said before, pretty sure my channel's dead. So if you don't think it's dead and you want to see it continue to live, hit the subscribe button down below for me. Make sure you leave a comment letting me know what your favorite part of the video is. And I will see you all next time.